Good evening. Thank you so much for sticking with us through this awesome day of What the Fuck is SRE. We are moving on to the sixth talk on the observability track. That talk will be Site Reliability Engineering for a blog presented by Krisztian, and he's going to walk us through some of the key features and elements that he's built into this awesome blog. And he's also got a surprise in store for us for the Q&A at the end. But along with that, I just want to give everybody a quick reminder of our conference as a COC. My amazing co-host Sevi is going to share that in the chat for us. And also a quick shout out to our amazing sponsors. They are Blameless, Cortex, Stormforge, Teleport, Lightstep, Fire Hydrant, PagerDuty, Rootly, and last but not least, Shoreline. And without further ado, I will hand over to Krisztian.
Hi everyone. This presentation is called Site Reliability Engineering for a blog. I have a main blog which is available at krisztianfekete.org, and I have another one which is dedicated to this talk. Some of the infrastructure on this talk is running on this domain. You can browse both of these during the presentation. So I'm Krisztian Fekete. I really like cloud native infrastructures and I really like self-hosting them. I'm mostly focusing on observability. I'm currently a field engineer at solo.io. Previously, I was an SRE DevOps engineer at LastPass. And yes, I'm running my blog on K3D and Istio. Since I left LastPass, I'm mostly responsible for the uptime of my blog, which is running on a completely self-hosted infrastructure. And a couple of days ago, I had the following idea. If I'm talking about self-hosting and cloud-native infrastructures, how about self-hosting this actual presentation as well? As you can see, I'm not using regular slides, PowerPoint slides. I'm using a Grafana dashboard. The whole presentation will be this Grafana dashboard. And my website is attached to this Grafana board, so you can send requests. You can make requests to the website itself, and on this Grafana panel we can explore the metrics and the logs and the traces of these requests. For the Q&A session, I have the following option for you. You can ask questions by sending curl request to the actual website. The actual curl command is available at the comments on the right hand side. Basically, you only have to pay attention to one thing, and that one thing is the formatting of the request. This command has a header specified. It must start with a Q letter and a colon, and it must end with a question mark. And of course, the URL at the end should be the wtf.krisztianfekete.org domain. But other than this, if you send a request, it will show up at the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. So you can start asking questions via your terminal if you would like to. The agenda itself will look like this. First, I will walk you through my self-hosted infrastructure, what components I am using, where am I self-hosting this stack of technologies. Then we will correlate some metrics, logs, and traces. These can be generated by your real request during the presentation. Then I will talk about visualizing logs in multiple forms. This can be visualizing them as metrics or logs as plain text logs themselves, right in Grafana. Then I will have a summary section, and we will explore the questions at the end of the presentation. So on this slide, you can see the infrastructure of the blog itself. As I mentioned, everything is self-hosted. This replica of my blog is running on Hetzner, just like the original one. The VM is provisioned by a Terraform module, and this Terraform module is also responsible for installing K3D on top of that. Then I have the next layer, which is basically a Helm file manifest. I'm using this Helm file manifest to deploy Istio on top of the Kubernetes platform. And I'm also using Helm file to deploy the tooling components as well. I'm using the Prometheus stack to have Grafana, Prometheus, Alert Manager, and all the usual components that can be found in this stack. And I'm using another Helm chart to install Loki and another to install Grafana Tempo. Loki and Tempo are great additions to this set, and a great addition to provide me the ability to present everything in a single Grafana dashboard. The blog itself is a static website generated by Hugo, so there's no real magic there. So this is the overview of the blog. When a user enters these URLs, first, the request will go to an Istio ingress gateway. This is the entry point to the service mesh, which is running on the Kubernetes cluster. I have Prometheus Istio there right next to this ingress gateway, but basically the request will most probably routed towards my blog, which is running in a separate namespace. And as I mentioned, I'm using Istio, the service mesh solution, so I have sidecars next to the workload in this case as well. What Istio can do in this example is to enable me to have advanced traffic routing capabilities, to enable me to have advanced security and to have observability, and most of the observability part is covered in this presentation. After the request reaches the blog pod, then Hugo will render the static website. And yes, as I mentioned, I have the Prometheus stack and the Loki stack. The Tempo stack is currently not illustrated on this slide. That's because Tempo is still a bit in a beta phase for my blog, so it's not deployed in production. It's currently under testing, and I'm fine-tuning the final configuration, but hopefully soon I will be ready to add it to the production site as well. So let's take a look at some metrics. As you can see, here we have latency, we have incoming requests by response codes, and we also have logs. If you are sending requests to the wt of krisztianfekete.org, then those requests will draw some content on these graphs. The great thing here is that you are just running a static website, a Hugo blog, but you can get these metrics. You can get these metrics with Istio because the sidecars are generating these statistics, so you won't need to instrumentalize your application itself. You can have all this observability feature set without adding a single line of code to an existing application. And let's say you are interested in why you have higher latency at this time. You can just zoom in and you will see the response codes for these slower requests. You will see the actual logs for these requests. And if you are interested in the traces, you can just drill down your log entries, click the tempo button, and you will see the actual request. Again, all this is without a single line of instrumentation. You will have a node graph, so you will see which services are affected in this request. Basically, as I mentioned, Istio ingress is the entry point, and after that, you will reach the Hugo static application, which is in this case called test, and it's in the test namespace. If you instrumentalize your application, you can get more detailed statistics about the nature of your traffic. You can drill down into the application. You can trace database calls and so on. But all this that you can see on this presentation is done without adding a single line of additional code itself to the application. Okay, so we can take a look at the logs, because until this point I was mostly talking about the metrics, and yes, you can see the logs here, but the great thing about Grafana Loki is that you can create metrics from logs. You can do this by using Loki as a data source, then use Loki's language, which is called LogQL, to parse the access logs of Istio, the Envoy access logs. And after that, you will be able to use a very Prometheus query language like language to get the data that you want. So basically, you can visualize them as graphs, you can create alerts upon them, and you can also create recording rules if that's something that you are interested in. So you can see the basic data is very similar to the one that I was showing earlier. The only difference here is that these metrics are coming from the logs themselves. And if you are interested in some advanced log parsing features, you can explore this other dashboard. It's actually open source and it's on the Grafana dashboard hub. So if you are searching for the name of the dashboard, you can most probably find it. Basically, every panel on this dashboard is powered by logs. So no metrics in this website. On this dashboard, everything is pure log parsing and illustrating this in Grafana. So yes, to sum it up, I really like and enjoy the full control that I have with this self-hosted infrastructure. It's quite cheap. The main blog currently it's around 15 euro per month, but this replica has much less resources, so I most probably can downgrade it and get away with less than 10 euros per month, and I can have a service mesh Kubernetes cluster, and I can play with different applications and more advanced scenarios as well. It's a good source of contact, so I'm hosting a blog, but if I don't have a topic, I can just write about the technical difficulties and experience that I have with running this complex and over-engineered infrastructure. So that's another plus, and I really found it fun to have all this for the simple use case of having a blog itself. So let's take a look at the questions, and I think we haven't got any in this form, but if I send a curl request in a terminal, then it should come right up. The question is sent, and there is the question. I can ask any other question. For example, is this still working? And in 5 minutes, it should be okay. And we have a question. How scalable is this blog? Well, Istio is quite performant because of its usage of Envoy proxy. So Istio itself is a very scalable solution. Hugo itself, I can say the same about that. So it's basically a static site generator, so there's no real magic there. Well, the things that you will need to look after is probably the extensive sets of metrics and logs that it will generate. So you will probably need to perform optimizations there, but the underlying infrastructure is really scalable. Basically, really large infrastructures and companies are running on technologies like this. So there's a long road until you hit some bottlenecks. For example, the blog itself it can run with one of the smallest virtual machines on any VPS, I would say. The Prometheus stack consumes much more resources than the blog itself. But I made some optimizations and fine-tunings, and yes, it's really lightweight.
Thank you, Krisztian. That was one of the best over-engineered blogs I've ever seen. And yes, one of my questions also has just dropped in the chat. Will there be a repo for the code? People are asking.
Well, for which part? As I mentioned, the Grafana dashboard is already available, and the blog's infra itself is not currently. But if you take a look at the solo.io organization's repositories, then there you will find the Hoot repository, and you will see a very similar simplified example of putting all this Istio infrastructure together with Hemfile. So that can be a good start. Other than that, you just need to deploy your own application on top of that.
Mm-hmm. And there is a comment in the chat. Victory Metrics would probably be a good use case for this instead of Prometheus. It's a bit more lightweight. From Hugo, this one is.
Yes. Well, everyone has their own preferences in terms of time series database.
Yeah.
I really prefer Prometheus and all the PromQL compatible time series databases. Victory Metrics can be used, but with the latest developments under the hood of the Prometheus time series database, it's also quite performant. And the really bottleneck would not be Prometheus itself, but the ingested metrics, and you can optimize them, and you should optimize them if you are generating many of those to have performant system in place.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you again for this great fast-paced session, and for the new joiners, you're on the observability track on What the Fuck is SRE 2022. I'm your Khaleesi of the day, plastic-wigged host of the day, and we'll have a very short break now. And after that, on track 1, the Cloud9 panel, 99.999 to be precise. Discussion will be held with Nathan Harvey, Abby Banksker, Anurag Gupta, and Hannah Foxwell with Barbara Ader. So yes, take a very quick break and make sure you're on track 1 to follow the panel discussion. We'll see you very soon.